What's up, gamers? Welcome back to 180 MTG. My name is Ryan Overturf, and today I'm going to be breaking down how you can build a 180 card cube, a Twobert, if you will, using only cards from the Magic Foundation Starter Collection, the Magic Foundation's Starter Collection Twobert, as I'm calling it. First things first, let's go over what the Magic Foundation Starter Collection is. This was released a little while ago in conjunction with the set Magic Foundations. This is a curated list of cards designed to be approachable and to get new players interested in and excited about Magic. It comes with over 350 curated Magic cards, including a sampling of foil cards in that, so you can get a feel for how you feel about foils. It also comes with 3 Magic Foundations play boosters, so you get some cards in addition to the curated list. You get to open some booster packs. It comes with 90 basic lands, so with those basic lands, this is in theory more than enough cards and the resources to actually build a cube, so that's the focus of today. Also comes with some tokens, some reference cards, a click wheel to keep track of your life. So a really nice thing to pick up for a new player for sure. And today we're going to explore how that might be good to be your first foray into Cube Draft. This is something that I've been asked about now and again ever since Magic Foundations released. It is definitely very accessible to have just one item that you can buy. You can order the Magic Foundation Starter Collection. Being able to turn that into a cube is really appealing. It's not anything that I wrote about or produced anything regarding when Magic Foundations first lost, as it kind of lined up at a pretty unfortunate time right after I lost my writing gig with Star City Games. But now seems like as good a time to do it as ever with the holidays coming up. This is something that you could definitely give as a gift to a friend who is maybe Magic or Cube curious that you want to get into Cube with, or maybe a gift to yourself, maybe something appeals to you about this design. I thought that I had missed the boat on designing something in this space when this was released or when the starter collection was first announced. I wasn't sure how long you'd be able to get something like this or how affordable they would be. After poking around a little bit, as I've been asked about this a few times recently, I did some research. Of course, if you are in the market to buy something like this, I would encourage you to check out your local game store. Always prioritize supporting your LGS. That's where your local community plays, community over corporations, even if you can get it cheaper somewhere else. If that's not an option for you, then it's not difficult to find these for under $100 shipped online. I'm not going to point you in any specific direction. I'm not sponsored by anybody. I assume if you play Magic, you have a pretty good idea where to buy Magic cards. I am absolutely not the first to market here on players wanting to convert the starter collection into a cube, so first a couple acknowledgements are in order. First, I want to acknowledge Tolarian Community College and the Tolarian Community College Student Cube, which uses more cards than just the starter collection. This uses a lot of cards just from the Magic Foundation's release as a whole. That's a 375 card cube, so it can support 8 players. I'm going to put a link to the YouTube video on that, as well as the Cube Cobra list, so you can check that out. Kind of an important distinction there, in addition to that being a larger cube, the fact that you need some other cards, that's not the exact kind of space I want to play in. I do only want to use cards from the Foundation Starter Collection for this project, because the entire idea is that this is something where you can just click a button, you can just go to your LGS, buy one box of things, and then you have a cube contained within that box, in addition to having a lot of extras where you can customize it just with cards you own, either outside of that, or just the additional cards in the starter collection itself. And then the other acknowledgement I want to make is to Dan Schneider, somebody who is very active in the Cube community and on social media in the Cube sphere. You may have seen Dan under the handle Work Life Value. Dan is the progenitor of the Devoid Cube, which is a cube where no cards have color, which is a pretty cool and unique design. And when Magic Foundations launched, Dan did sketch up a Twobert list using just cards from the starter collection. So I'm going to have a link to Dan's Cube Cobra page to his design for a Foundation starter collection Twobert. And it's going to bear a lot of similarities to mine. We are drawing from a very small card pool. We're drawing for the same very small card pool, so that's not surprising. There's a couple of fundamental differences. Dan does break singleton, which is something that I generally advocate for maintaining singleton in my cube designs, but I want to offer this frame of reference, and that's definitely going to be an option as I kind of break down my design for ways that you can modify this cube list to fit your personal preferences and those of your play group. And I, of course, need to shout out the good people at Wizards of the Coast that designed Magic Foundations, that put the work into designing the Magic Foundation Starter Collection and to curating this mix of appealing and simple designs that can really introduce players to a game that has existed for more than 30 years and show you a lot of the history and show you many different ways you can approach the game, different game pieces that you might find fun, different things to explore, different things to look into in the wider world of Magic. Definitely need to shout out my good friend Carmen Klomparens, who I know put a ton of work into curating the starter collection. Designing a cube from a starter collection is not possible without a starter collection, and this is the first time we've really had this WotC product that is so easy to convert into a cube. So shout out to the good people at Wizards of the Coast for this. And one final acknowledgement before I get into things today. The folks over at Lucky Paper Radio in January of this year, they actually interviewed Carmen regarding the Foundation Starter Collection and how to convert that into a cube. Kind of riffed a lot of thoughts on that, as well as kind of picking apart some of the particulars of the starter collection. So you get some thoughts from Carmen there, as well as some insights and cube thoughts from both Andy Mangold and Anthony Maddox, two very passionate cube designers and curators. Lucky Paper Radio, a very long-standing Cube podcast. Definitely check them out. It's episode 235, so they put out a lot of stuff, very passionate. They do a weekly podcast as well, so check them out for sure. I'll have a link to that episode in the show notes here as well. A big thing that I want to stress today is the 180 cards that I have selected are a starting point, not an end point. And just generally, if you're getting into Cube, maybe you haven't cubed at all, maybe you've cubed a little bit on the digital cubes, maybe you've just seen Cube mentioned, watched some videos, whatever. It might seem like Cube is this thing that you go and you do sometimes. And for a lot of people it is. It's something you can engage with as much as you want. But for people like me who get really invested in Cube, Cube is not a destination. It's a journey. The design, the curation, changing cards, making updates, watching the new set to see if there's any new tools for your design, how things can fit into your cubes, thinking about which of your friends will enjoy playing with them, and designing these play experiences for people that you care about. That's the beauty of Cube. It's not just showing up and playing games and trying to win your matches. You lose a lot of that if you only engage with Cube digitally. And so I really like that the Foundation Starter Collection does exist with enough cards that you can fairly easily convert into a cube. And that's why I want to share this today. I want this to be the start of some player's journey. So my hope in sharing this design today is that some people listen to this and maybe you pick this up and you play this cube and you fall in love with it and it's the cube that you play. That's totally fine. That's great. That's beautiful. But if you have the interest, the bandwidth, the passion to really use this as a jumping off point and really start exploring the infinitely customizable world of Cube from there, then it's my pleasure to welcome you to really what is more of a lifestyle than a hobby for me. Alright, so let's go ahead and look at the design. I will of course have the Cube Cobra page linked in the show notes. First thing that you'll observe is, like most of my designs, this is a color balanced cube. There's an equal number of every monocolor color. It's 24 cards in this design. I have 2 cards for every 2 color pair. And then 3 full land cycles, just the lands that come in the Foundation Starter Collection, and then some odds and ends, your 5-color card with the Ramos Dragon Engine, and then your Evolving Wilds as the 31st land. So there's already something worth acknowledging here as a jumping off point. Color balance is not mandatory in Cube. If you go ahead and look at Schneider's list, Schneider does have some imbalance. Some colors have more cards, some have fewer. Totally reasonable to do. I like a color balance. I just like the idea of it being equally likely to see any card of a given color. That's just a good brain feel for me and seems to line up pretty well with my general goal with any cube design to make it equally inviting to play any combination of colors. Once again, not mandatory. You can do all kinds of things when it comes to designing your own cubes. But for the purpose of a starter cube, I do want things to kind of be as basic as possible, and then to allow you to adventure and explore and do whatever you want creatively from this jumping off point. So my list is color balanced, it's singleton. Those are a couple of my personal biases, but I'm encouraging you here to say you can do whatever you want. This is something that is just a little bit more natural, that feels good to me, but the way that I do it is not the correct way. And this is something that right from the jump, because you are buying the entire Magic Foundation starter collection, at least I assume anybody messing with this cube is doing that instead of buying all these cards individually. Maybe you just have them all, maybe you drafted a bunch of Magic Foundations, or like you already have a cube in this space and you want to try out my design. But for the most part, my assumption is that anybody trying this cube out is going to have the extra cards from the starter collection just off to the side somewhere, and I want to encourage you to explore and play with those. Maybe there's a card that I didn't include that's one of your favorites. Go ahead and slot that in. And you can even just put in a 181st card. It doesn't hurt anybody, like the 180 number, of course. That's my brand, 180 MTG. But all this stuff is something that you can make your own, whatever you want. So this is just kind of a rigid structure that it is easy to abide by. I've put out a lot of articles, videos, podcasts, whatever, that explain how you can play in this space. And so for that, it's really easy to follow along in this way. But when it comes to your own designs, your own play, I want to encourage you again and again to do it the way that is the most fun and engaging for you. And I'm going to find a couple points today to maybe acknowledge where there's a hole in this design, there's something that maybe would jump out as something you would want to change, or where there's something where like you'd want a second copy of a card from the starter collection itself. So let's go ahead and dive in, break the cube down by color, and see what's going on with this design, and maybe take a look at some of those areas where you could already start to change just with the cards you already picked up in the Foundation starter collection. Alright, so starting off with white. White has kind of a robust life gain theme. That's definitely something that appeals to a lot of kitchen table Magic players. A Johnny's Pride Mate, a long time casual Magic player favorite. There's actually 2 copies of those in the starter collection. That's a card that it makes a lot of sense to me to actually break Singleton for. My design is just fully Singleton here, but 2 Pride Mates make a lot of sense. And it also is a really nice instructive card. For a new player that latches on to life gain, giving them access to a card that actually says, okay, you're gaining life, but you have to win the game, and giving them a tool that shows off a powerful way to convert that life gain into winning the game. A Johnny's Pride Mate, a creature that can really get out of hand. That's a useful card to give to a new player to kind of show off what actually playing the game is about, show off that just gaining life doesn't do it. There's some other cards in this space here as well. Angel of Vitality, another pretty cool one there that gets larger when you gain life. It has some evasion, a 3-mana 2/2 flyer that becomes a 4/4 if you've gained up to 25 or more life. So some cool stuff going on there. And then, of course, Lyra Dawnbringer, just an awesome kind of hallmark giant angel that does gain life, but is really good at winning the game too. I do want to call out a card that really fits this theme very well that I have eschewed from my design, and that's Lyndon the Steadfast Queen. 3-mana 3/3 with Vigilance, and whenever a white creature you control attacks, you gain a life, and that's because it costs white, white, white. There's a cycle, there's a triple pip card, at least one for every color in the starter collection, and I've done a lot of drafts with under 80 card cubes. It never comes up in the 2-player drafts. Like, mathematically, it's not impossible, but it's so unlikely that you could really draft a monocolor deck. In the 4-player draft, when you actually draft all 180 cards, you can be monocolor sometimes, but it's rare enough that this is a slot that you only get to play sometimes, and triple pipped is so hard to actually make work in a 2-color deck, kind of a full non-starter in a 3-color deck. And all of the mana fixing lands in this cube, there's only one that does more than 2 color fixing, and that's Evolving Wilds. All the mana fixing enters tapped. I think you can put this card in the cube, and sometimes it's okay to play this card off curve. I mean, 3/3 Vigilance, that's a pretty reasonable body, but I think this is the kind of thing that's pretty extreme. We don't have that many triple pipped 3-color cards in the entire history of Magic. It's the kind of thing that I could see giving a new player a distaste for the mana resource system, whereas I think that the way that lands and the mana system work, like, that's the reason that Magic has been able to exist for over 30 years. Like, every other game has tried to quote-unquote improve upon that, has made the game worse. So I want to avoid a thing like this that maybe could show up in a new player could think, well, that's stupid, I can't cast my card. I do want to make the mana of the cube a little bit more workable, so I'm going to avoid a card like that. I do feature in the other colors 5 or 6 mana cards that are triple pip. Those are way more castable at the time you would want to cast them. They're reasonably powerful, even if you have to wait a turn or two beyond their usual casting cost to cast them, whereas Linden can be pretty disappointing if it doesn't show up on time, and it's fairly unlikely that that happens in this experience. I think it's fine to put Linden in a 180 card cube. It like just swap it in this design with these lands. It's probably more of a teaching moment. It's probably the kind of thing where it shows up in packs and you have that thing where it's like, oh, that's a card that it looks maybe appealing with some of your other cards, but you're really not supposed to draft it or play it most of the time. And you can do that kind of thing. I personally really like just having all cards that are fun to play. I think that that's something that Cube really frees me to do, and so I'm going to be against that in my design, but I did want to have that conversation as something that you might be interested in trying, and either maybe you believe in more Linden the card, casting it late, maybe you believe more in being able to play a monocolored deck in this kind of environment, maybe you believe more in the 30 tap lands. I don't know, whatever your reason, you can certainly explore that. Something that's pretty important here regarding just the design and the gameplay of the cube is that every color is at least half creatures. Blue is the only one that's only half creatures. It has more of a spell theme, but generally there's a lot of creatures in this cube, and most of the games are going to be about creatures and trying to win in combat. This is actually true of a lot of my Twobert designs, and for that reason, I'm typically pretty cold on featuring a sweeper, a card that destroys all creatures, just because it can be so backbreaking in a way that I don't think is the most fun. But I did make a point to feature the Fumigate from the starter collection here in the cube to give you a taste for that. If it's something that you like more than I do, if it's something that maybe you think that a sweeper is an essential part of either cube gameplay or part of White's color identity, I absolutely want to have things in this cube that encourage you to try things that maybe you wouldn't see in my other designs. You know, I've already said there's some of my biases loudly on display here, but I do want to show off a wider range of things that other players might like that I don't necessarily have the most affinity for. So I think Fumigate is worth mentioning for being one of the more powerful and one of the less fun effects in the cube, but your preferences and your mileage may vary. And then one more card and kind of a small thing going on in this cube that I want to draw attention to. I have the Stroke of Midnight here, which is a 3-mana instant that destroys a non-land permanent. Its controller creates a 1/1 human creature token. You will rarely, if ever, see me casting a card. I almost said never, but I play Into the Floodmaw sometimes. But you will rarely see me play a card that gives my opponent something for me to get an effect. I'm pretty categorically against this stuff. The reason that I chose to feature that here is also something you don't see too much in my designs. There's a decent selection of pretty strong enchantments in this cube. Cards like Gratuitous Violence, Primeval Bounty, even the Felidar Retreat in the white column here. Those can be really strong cards that there's not a ton of ways to interact with in the cube, and so giving white this kind of effect, my personal preference, I would rather have a card like Oblivion Ring here. Some food for thought, you start to develop this cube from here, but it is important to give you this tool, so there's something that is worth exploring in your own play experience, in your own design. As you're cubing, maybe think about how much do you enjoy the presence of enchantments, how much do you think players should have to go out of their way to answer enchantments. They can be a tricky card type, specifically in a small cube environment, specifically when you want every card to have some play. So that's something that kind of jumps out at me as something that I would like to change, but I also know that some people really like a beast with them. So maybe you're really into Stroke of Midnight. That's just something I want to draw attention to because it is something that deviates a little bit from what you'll see in my other designs. The other option in this space for white in the starter collection is Disenchant, just the classic 2-mana instant, destroy target artifact or enchantments. I go for Stroke of Midnight over that just because in general in Cube, the texture that I like, I want it to be the case that just hands that are lands and spells can play. Especially for a newer player experience, I don't like the idea of putting in cards that sometimes you draw them and they just do nothing. So even if I don't love the downside of Stroke of Midnight, it at least always plays, and that goes a long way for me. Moving on to blue. Blue has really the classic spells matter thing going on. Instants and sorceries, cards that care about casting them, drawing extra cards, cards that care about drawing extra cards. Tolarian Terror being kind of a cool signpost to, hey, you want to have a lot of instants and sorceries. Kind of a cool card here is Micromancer, a 4 mana 3/3 that tutors up an instant or sorcery of mana value 1 when it enters. There's not a ton in blue, just opt and unsummon in my list. This is a spot where it does make some sense to break Singleton. You can dip into the additional copies of Opt from the starter collection. That's something where you would likely either want to cut the Micromancer or add more of a toolbox for it as you played with this environment more. But notably, just in this design, there are options in all 5 colors. There's things you can do with Micromancer. I think it's pretty cool to think about how a card is contextualized differently in different color pairs. For example, Micromancer's a pretty cool card in blue-green decks, opening up the ability to get Giant Growth and Snakeskin Veil or Primal Might, just making more use of the body and getting more engaged in combat, which is a little bit different from a more blue-heavy deck would normally want to do. So I do like that aspect of the card a lot. Arcanus the Omnipotent is a great introduction to tap-out control decks, a 6 mana 3/4 that taps to draw 3 cards. It's the kind of thing where sometimes it can be frustrating. You tap out for this and it dies right away, but then there's the threat you untap and then you draw 3 extra cards every turn, and then it becomes difficult to lose the game. These kind of effects are extreme. It's the sort of thing where you really get to test, do you enjoy having the 6 mana tap out card that doesn't inherently generate value? I mean, they don't design cards quite like this these days, at least for serious standard or competitive play. Generally, cards that cost this much mana, they give you something when you cast them, so you don't feel bad about tapping out and running into a hero's downfall right away and just having your threat cleanly answered. So that's something to really kind of gauge a new player's interest in. Do you enjoy the promise, the dream of untapping with Arcanus the Omnipotent? Or is it too deflating when it's just killed by a kill spell right away? Does it do too much when you untap with it? Some interesting questions to unpack. Definitely a good conversation starter as you navigate drafts and maybe play games with somebody who's new to Cube or certainly new to Magic and ask, all right, what do you like about this kind of effect? Is there a way maybe you could do it differently that you might like more? So really nice kind of piece to focus that kind of conversation around. And there's a lot of conversation starters here. And that's something that I didn't say at the intro that I really do want to encourage if you are kind of introducing somebody to Magic. It's showing them kind of these fundamental aspects of different card shapes and types of gameplay and just picking their brain. What do they enjoy about them? Which ones do they like more than others? What do they find fun? And getting at that, if and when you start making changes, the whole goal should really be to move towards the most fun experience for the players that you're playing with. And I will say it's important to keep in mind when you're soliciting feedback in that way, certainly with somebody who is new to Magic, they're not always going to say exactly what they mean. Try to get a feel for what they are feeling. If they're not enjoying themselves, they might articulate things in a way that mean a specific thing to you. If they say Arcanus is too weak, they're probably talking about tapping out for it and it being destroyed immediately. They're probably not saying drawing 3 extra cards is too weak, So I think focusing the conversations on what is fun, what were you feeling, and then trying to navigate the construction of the cube and deliver games in a space that seems to speak to what would appeal to them about games. On the topic of tap-out control, there's some all-stars here in the blue column. Finale of Revelation, Rite of Replication, River's Rebuke, all effects that can be contextually very game impactful, things that can break games wide open, can win the game on the spot when they resolve. Those are definitely things to pay attention to as you feel out the environment. Cards like Finale of Revelation and Rite of Replication, those two specifically, just the scalability where the 4 mana just cast Rite of Replication, copy something. That floor is pretty high, and then it has this 9 mana. 9 is a lot of mana, but it's kind of a win the game mode in Finale of Revelation. It kind of always plays. If you're casting it for at least 4, it's not horrible to cast, and then it just really kind of scales as the game progresses as well. If you end up in a board stall, it's maybe the most powerful top deck in the environment. So, kind of asking the question, how much do you want this kind of scalability in the environment? That's definitely something that can be fun. I mean, kicker is a mechanic that Magic keeps going back to, both literally with the mechanic kicker and also a lot of mechanics that just give you both modality and scalability, ways to sink your mana. It is fun, but make sure that you have the right amount of it and the kind that you particularly enjoy yourself. On the topic of that, with these tap out cards, one card from the starter collection that I didn't put in my list is actually a card that I played a lot when I was first getting into Magic at the kitchen table. I cast a lot of Confiscates. 6 mana aura, enchant permanent, you control enchanted permanent. I think that it can be pretty deflating to just kind of lose to your own thing. I was playing like 3 or 4 player casual games. To be fair, it is totally reasonable to play 3 or 4 player games with a 180 card cube. Definitely the kind of thing where you can just draft the same way as if you were playing 1v1 games, but just play multiplayer. I've done this with some of my cubes. It's also a topic I plan to tackle in the future. I think multiplayer Magic is just a fun way to play. It's the kind of thing where if you are going to play multiplayer, I think Confiscate is definitely way more fun in that context. I mean, it's still fun in 2-player games, but it's fun for only the player casting it. It's kind of more of a dramatic thing that happens in multiplayer. But I am making a subjective judgment here. Maybe you would find that a lot of fun for 2-player games. Maybe who you want to share this cube with is going to find that fun in 2-player games. So it's one that's definitely worth thinking about that's not in my list, but does come in the collection. I think that the blue column here does a good job of showing off a range of cards that are kind of critical mass, cards that require synergies and specific archetypes to really make work. That Micromancer, the Tolarian Terror, even the Shipwreck Dowser, kind of asking you to play a high volume of spells or the right kind of spells to really make them work. And then those big effects like Finale of Revelation you're going to play in any blue deck, Arcanus the Omnipotent that doesn't so much care about the other cards you're playing, so long as on 6 mana you're able to make 3 blue to actually cast it. And that's going to be really useful to kind of get a feel for, okay, do I enjoy just generically strong cards? Or do I enjoy more playing in this space from kind of chasing a specific thing? And this is going to be a pretty instructive column for exploring that kind of dynamic. Moving on to black, the black column definitely showcases a lot of the different things that black can do here. You have a good spread of removal, and removal that does different things. You know, you have an Edict and Tribute to Hunger, you have Hero's Downfall that can destroy any creature, or Planeswalker, which is a fun conversation starter. There's no Planeswalkers in the Foundation Starter Collection, so of course there's none in the cube list here. So that's a fun moment of discovery, asking, hey, what's a Planeswalker? What's going on with this? And you have a range of different removal spells. Moment of Craving that can only answer small creatures. Feed the Swarm that can destroy any creature or be another piece of enchantment removal, and it costs a lot of life if you want to answer a bigger thing. So you have some different options there in removal, and that can definitely give you a feel for, do you enjoy when you have to have the kind of specific answer for the specific threat? Do you enjoy more just paying more either mana or life and having these catch-all answers? So that's some fun space to explore. You see a little bit of reanimation going on. You have Null Priest of Oblivion and Zombify, so you can get a feel for sneakily putting creatures in the graveyard and putting them on the battlefield for less than their intended mana cost, things like that. It's kind of a funny gap in the mana curve in the black column, and also just in the Foundation Starter Collection. There's no 5 mana black cards. We just jump right up to Arbiter of Woe and Massacre Worm. I like the Massacre Worm just because that's a dramatic enough effect that it's satisfying to zombify a Massacre Worm, certainly if you do it before turn 6, and it's going to kind of win a lot of games outright on its own, so it kind of gives you a feel, okay, do you enjoy this zombify thing? It's a good thing to test the waters on. It's something that you generally don't see in my cubes unless they're like vintage cube, like high power stuff. I generally don't love Reanimate outside of that context, but it is something, those big dramatic effects, those can be really fun. And also it's the kind of thing that's going to be good to have if you do explore the multiplayer space too, I do have to say. There are some black creatures low on the curve here. I guess I did do things a little bit differently relative to Linden, where I have Calastia, Highborn, and Gatekeeper of Malakir, where Gatekeeper of Malakir is really at its best where on turn 3 you're able to pay BBB and get that Edict effect right away. It's a little bit different from Linden, and also it is more of a part of Black's expression of the color pie, where just needing a lot of black pips, you do see that more commonly in Black. So it's kind of an introduction to what the different colors represent in the game in that way. But I will own that it maybe looks a little bit weird with me issuing Linden, so that's worth talking about there. Kind of an interesting thing about the Black column is that you see a good amount of death payoffs. You have cards like Midnight Reaper that whenever a non-token creature you control dies, it take one and you draw a card, and some other stuff like Vengeful Blood Witch, which makes your opponent lose a life and you gain a life whenever it or another one of your creatures dies. But there's no sacrifice outlet. These are just kind of cards that encourage you to get into combat, whether it's through attacking or blocking, and you can kind of navigate games that way. Not having an explicit sacrifice outlet certainly lends an interesting texture to that, and I do think it is more new player friendly, just because that kind of sacrifice engine, it snowballs just in such a big and dramatic way. It's going to be a lot different than what things like a white creature deck that's attacking and blocking get up to. So it does make some sense, and amusingly and worth noting, there is a sacrifice outlet in black-white. You have Ailey Eternal Pilgrim, which you can pay a mana and sacrifice a creature, and then you can trigger all your death triggers that way. So that's definitely something that's a cool point of exploration in the cube, where you go into more of a sacrifice deck instead of just a deck that is kind of getting more morbid triggers in just black. When you go into black-white, you can actually kind of control when you're getting those payoffs. And then I do want to talk about Duress. Duress, another classic card, 1 mana sorcery, target opponent reveals their hand, you choose a non-creature, a non-land card from it, they discard that card. It's really deflating when Duress misses. It's the kind of card I really like in high power environments. I'm less about in low power environments. Kind of similar to Disenchant, it maybe lives more in the sideboard here. You can main deck it. It's something that can be instructive. It's something that players can learn about. And I do like the comparison next to Seeker's Folly, which is a 3-mana sorcery where either you make your opponent discard 2 cards or give creatures your opponent's control -1/-1 till end of turn. I like that Seeker's Folly has that modality. It kind of always does something. It's both true that the discard ability always makes them discard 2 cards. You don't have to find a certain card type. And if they don't have cards in hand, they probably have creatures. You can get something. Even if you don't kill anything with the -1/-1 effect, it maybe can impact the texture of combat. It maybe gives you something. So I do like having those cards side by side. That's definitely something that can be instructive in terms of card evaluation, that can show up in the games and be kind of fun teaching moments that way. Also, you might just have totally different preferences than me. Maybe Duress is a card you're fine playing, except that you miss sometimes. There are some pretty powerful cards. I was talking about Finale of Revelation, Rite of Replication, River's Rebuke. Those are all great hits with Duress. There's going to be options in other colors as well. It's another thing that can theoretically answer an enchantment if you're able to Duress away any of the strong enchantment cards in the queue before they show up. So it's worth having around, and it's definitely something that you will have your own opinions on. You can form your own preferences for both your own cube curation and how you navigate the drafts and the games. Moving on to red, once again, you do see a wide range of the colors expression. You see some cheap, aggressive creatures, red with by far the most 1-mana creatures of any color in the game, with 4 1-drops clocking in, but still going all the way up to 6 for Lathliss Dragon Queen. You gotta have some cool dragons. Some fun ways to trigger that. I love Tarian Mauler showing up as a changeling, and then you can explore how a creature with every creature type can have synergies with all kinds of different things. And I do really enjoy the different texture of the 4 different 1-drops here. When you hold Dragon Master Outcast up next to Stromkirk Noble, those are the 2 stronger, that's the top half in power level of the options. And I like that they highlight different things. Stromkirk Noble is a creature that when you have it on turn 1, it is so different than when you don't. And it's even different when you have it on the play. Being able to connect, start getting those +1/+1 counters, the way it scales as it hits, as opposed to Dragon Master Outcast, which is just always a 1-mana 1/1. Not much to write home about on the first turn of the game, but then once you get to a point where you have 6 lands, it pays you off. So when you're trying to curve out, when you have an aggressive deck, it's a body, it's a creature that attacks and blocks, it always checks the boxes there, but then it kind of scales in a very different way than Stromkirk Noble. Fanatical Firebrand's cool, and it's different in a way where it just does what it says on the tin. It's a 1-mana 1/1. You can always sacrifice it to do a damage somewhere. And then Gitu Lava Runner, I think, highlights something cool in that blue and red are both kind of the instants and sorceries, the spells matter colors. And Lava Runner kind of shows off that red will often have less dramatic and more one-note effects. It says, okay, if you're casting instants and sorceries, you're going to be able to deal some amount of damage. Gutter Snipe really reinforces that, where it's like, okay, here's a 3-mana 2/2, not the best body in the world, but as long as you're casting spells, you're going to be doing the thing you want to do, damaging your opponent, trying to remove the player from the game. And this is reinforced in the spell column too. Love Crash Through, love it always, love it here. Just it being a less powerful, a less useful, weaker card selection, has a timing restriction being a sorcery over the instant and opt. Just showing that red plays in this space, but it does it differently and in some ways worse than blue does it, which I really like. And just also the harmony where you can combine these colors if you have kind of the goals of what the cards and the payoffs have in mind and play blue-red together in that way. There's a neat conversation starter in Mind Sparker. I like these soft kind of hate cards. 3-mana 3/2 first strike. Whenever opponent casts a white or blue instant or sorcery spell, Mind Sparker deals 2 damage to that player. So this card is just like fine on rate. You play this 3-mana 3/2 with first strike, and sometimes it gives you additional upside against the right colors. A good litmus test for how you feel about color hosers. I generally avoid color hosers in my designs. I do specifically find this one pretty charming, both because the card is kind of just playable. It curves out nicely just with creatures that attack and block with power and toughness, and it gives you a little something extra. It's not oppressive to play through this, and it's only blue and white instants and sorceries. It's kind of punishing against blue, but blue always is going to have this incentive. Blue knows it has to have answers for creatures, and white only has so many instants and sorceries to begin with, so it's like not that big of a deal for white either. So it's kind of a nice taste of a color hoser. I can start a conversation about that kind of thing. I was just singing the praises of the different textures of the 1-drops in red. The different textures of the 4-drops I'm a little less fond of. But there is something to explore here, some good conversation starters. With Redcap Gutter Dweller and Strongbox Raider, I like that Strongbox Raider is not always upside. It kind of, the raid ability incentivizes and encourages players to attack. That's nice, gives you value that way. Redcap Gutter Dweller, you just cast it, you always get this enters ability. And then Ravenous Giant is a 4-mana 5/5 with a drawback. At the beginning of your upkeep, it deals a damage to you. So you really highlight 3 different ways to play, 3 different incentives to getting 4 mana. I'm a huge fan of Strongbox Raider, at least this shape of card, where it forces you to care about a specific thing. I really like it, kind of similar to Micromancer, why I like that card. It encourages you to do specific things in draft. Strongbox Raider encourages you to do specific things in the game. And maybe Strongbox Raider is not my favorite card for this role, but I like what it does texturally. Redcap Gutter Dweller is kind of more the shape of modern Magic, where you always get something, so you can kind of test a player. Okay, which do you like? Do you like the shape of kind of working for a little bit more? Do you want something a little bit stronger? Maybe the sweet spot, I think, is more of a card that is stronger but does require you to work for it. And then some people like the cards with the drawbacks. There's something charming about Ravenous Giant. Certainly, if the kind of gameplay you're more interested in is closer to retail limited than competitive constructed, Ravenous Giant's going to look a lot closer to the cards that you play with than the cards that I play with. So I like having it here to kind of inform the direction that you want the cube to go. Just kind of that spread. While it's a little bit weird to have all 3 in the cube, keeping in mind that this is a starting point and not an ending point, it's kind of a nice conversation starter, a nice question to ask. Which of these 3 effects do you like having the most? And, there's something merit to also some players are going to like having the different spread because they do lead to different styles of games. The way you play with and value them all is different. And there's some appeal to that as well, having all that different stuff in the same environment. And the last red card I want to talk about is Seismic Rupture, 3-mana sorcery, deals 2 damage to each creature without flying. Something that is possibly even less fun than the sweeper that kills everything is the sweeper that only kills one player's things. So this kind of card, you know it's not going to kill everything all the time. Maybe it's more of a sideboard card for that reason. You can construct your deck in a way where everything that you cast either has flying or 3 toughness. So you can kind of always beat your Seismic Rupture. That can be a fun puzzle and level up moment to encourage players to think about the game differently in that way. It's the kind of thing that you typically will not see in my 180 card cube designs. I don't love that kind of Plague Wind, destroy all creatures your opponent control effect, certainly when it's for a low amount of mana. But my preferences are not the end all be all, and similar to Fumigate, it's kind of good to have this different texture of sweeper here to have a conversation just about sweepers generally. Do you want them? If you do want them, what do you want them to look like? The cheaper one, the more expensive one, the one that's more selective, the one that kills everything. What is fun about a sweeper to you? Are sweepers fun to you at all? These are pretty meaningful questions to be asking as you explore the space of Magic and Cube broadly. And that brings us to green. Green is the color that's going to make the strongest argument for breaking Singleton if you want to design a 180 card cube using only cards from the starter collection, and that is green only actually has one mana creature here. Wildwood Scourge does not count. You need to put some mana into X for it to survive. There is just one solitary Llanowar Elves in my list. And I will say, Llanowar Elves is such a powerful card. It is such a dramatically different card. The games are so dramatically different when you have turn 1 Llanowar Elves versus when you don't, that I think it's playing with fire a little bit to have a bunch of Llanowar Elves around. That said, only having one, you're less likely to show it off. It's probably good just to have 2 Llanowar Elves, just so you can get a feel for the games. If you play a lot of games in this cube with 1 Llanowar Elves, then yeah, you're going to see the difference in the turn 1 Llanowar Elves games versus top decking it later, get a feel for how much you like that 1 mana dork in your gameplay. But having multiple copies does accelerate the timeline to getting to those teachable moments. And the other thing about having multiple copies is with only one 1-drop in green, and then there's only 3 2-drops, it's definitely possible that green is in some ways at a fundamental disadvantage, at least in the early turns relative to the other colors. That's something that I would be aware of as you explore this cube. You know, I have 4 4-drops in green, and then there's some other ramp at 3, but there's not even any 2 mana ramp here. So it's very much possible that just having 2 or more of the 4 Llanowar Elves that come in the starter collection present in the cube here, at least for those reasons, it does make the strongest argument in the environment to break Singleton. And then beyond that, there's not a ton of texture to green. You have some mana acceleration, you have some creatures with power and toughness, you do get to go up to 7 for Palaka Worms, you have the most expensive monocolor spells. Some mana ramp. You do have a couple pump spells. I do like Giant Growth, Snakeskin Veil. A couple fight spells, both Bite Down and Primal Might, that do add some texture, do reinforce that green really cares about getting some creatures on the battlefield, so those ones are nice for that reason. And those also will inform, do you like playing with these green creature removal spells? They at least show off that green is a harder time executing on removal than the other colors, so it's a good expression of the color pie there, needing to have a creature to resolve your Bite Down versus Hero's Downfall, showing off that black is much better at this kind of thing. I do like the different textures of the different 4-drops in green. You have Sirach the Hunt Galler, which is just really narrowly focused on beatdowns, Vizier of the Menagerie that can generate value in your creature decks in long games, Elvish Regrower, another kind of value card to kind of play an attrition game against your opponent, and then Gnarlback Rhino. This one's a 4 mana 4/4 with trample, that whenever you cast a spell that targets this creature, draw a card. It kind of shows you what you want to be doing in green. It shows you that those bite and fight spells are kind of an aspect of the color identity. There's also some exploration there, right? You have some cards in other colors that where you can target your own creature, some fun things to explore, even things like using Burst Lightning to target your own creature there because it'll survive, or when you use Valorant Stance to save it and drawing a card. So some cool exploration with that card for sure. And then there's the big green tap out card, very texturally different than the blue tap out cards. That's Overrun. Green, 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 2 creatures you control get +3/+3 and trample until end of turn. Overrun really only does anything when it wins the game immediately this turn. It's especially true in a queue where there's no planeswalkers to attack down. So that is a really good classic conversation starter as well. Do you like having this card in the environment that really doesn't do anything unless it wins outright? So some games it just rots into your hand. Otherwise, casting it, you kind of win or you don't. For some players, just the promise, just daydreaming, just thinking about setting up and having the big lethal overrun, that's fun enough to imagine when you're drafting and putting this card in your deck. So it's good to feature in this environment for that reason alone. In the colorless column, I largely have Mana Ramp, a ton of different mana rocks here, going all the way up to Hedron Archive, so you can play some big spells. Every color has at least stuff that costs 5 or more mana. White's Archway Angel is not like a thrilling card to accelerate into. You want to be casting that one when you control a lot of gates, but generally it is welcome to have some mana acceleration. And these colorless cards, they are the things that make you more able to play a monocolor deck. And again, that's where Linden, the white card, is not going to play as well as the triple picked cards in the other colors, because using a Manalith effect, using a Burnished Heart to get your mana online before you can cast it, Linden is going to be less impactful in those other triple pipped effects. And then I do really like both the flexibility on Meteor Golems. You have an answer to any non-land permanent you can play in any deck if you're willing to pay 7 mana for it. And Steel Hellkite maybe loudly declares something that happens in colorless, where so many of these cards, they're colorless, they're a little bit less efficient, maybe a little bit weaker, so you're allowed to play them in any deck. And Steel Hellkite's an example of, actually, sometimes the colorless cards are really strong and you are highly incentivized to play with them. So I enjoy that quite a bit. A little similar texture to Ramos' Dragon Engine, where you have this 6 mana 4/4 flyer that grows larger every time you cast a spell. Good way to show off that colorless cards, they do play in decks differently. Like a deck that draws extra cards is going to get more benefit off of that Ramos' Dragon Engine. So some cool texture with those big colorless spells for sure. And then for gold cards, I have 2 cards for every 2 color pair. Not really a lot of wiggle room as you look at the entire list from the starter collection. So mostly they're just present here. I like an equal representation for every color pair. And there is a wide range of different things gold cards can do. You see cards like Dryad Militant. You have this 1 mana hybrid card. You can play it in a green or a white deck. It's a 1 mana 2/1. It's fine, but it's not like this big effect, and it certainly doesn't draw you into a color pair. It's just a 1-drop that's realistically more often going to show up in your white deck than your green deck, but it kind of shows off what gold can be, similar to Mystical Teachings, which you can play in blue with just like a small number of black mana sources to flash it back some of the time. It's not really fully a gold card, as opposed to big dramatic effects like Prime Speaker Zagana and Aurelia the War Leader, which are big draws to play 2 colors fully, double pipped in both colors, and they have these big effects. And Ovika Enigma Goliath, that's got to be the most dramatic gold card in the spread here. And is it 5 blue red, 6/6 flyer, ward 3, and also pay 3 life. You got to pay all that to target it. And then whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create X 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature tokens, where X is the mana value of that spell. They gain haste until end of turn. Difficult to imagine losing if you untap with this, and some good protection, some good costs your opponent has to pay if they want to try to prevent you from doing so. This card it will show off the difference between 6 and 7 mana for sure. Getting up to 7 mana is a real cost, but pretty lenient on the colors, just 1 blue and 1 red pip. This is also maybe the best creature to zombify in the cube, at least in some games it's going to be. It's kind of nice to have a card in the spread there, but it is one that is a bit loud in terms of how much output it has on the battlefield, about how little game there is left to be played if it does show up. So it's one to watch as you experience the environment. And then I do also like having just some nuts and bolts removal spells here. Both Maelstrom Pulse and Mortify, they're kind of close in texture and power level, and it kind of asks the question, when you're playing with gold cards, if there's a card that pushes you to play 2 colors, are you looking for those dramatic effects? Are you happier having Aurelia the War Leader, or just having a card that can destroy an enchantment and a creature? Is that worth going into 2 colors? Which of those things do you find more fun? And there's room for both too. I mean, they're all represented here, and it's a totally reasonable way to do gold. Gold can do a broad range of things, And just by the nature of Magic and how you want to have all 5 colors, and how sometimes you want players to play monocolored decks or close to it, you generally have fewer gold slots, at least relative to the total number of monocolor slots, even if there's more gold cards in any specific color in a monocolor sense. It's kind of good to showcase a range of what gold can be, given that general texture. And that's absolutely something you can explore. Using just a starter collection, you're pretty limited on gold, but it's not out of the question to add a ton more gold cards. One of the first cubes that a friend of mine designed was a cube that only had gold spells, similar to the set Alara Reborn. Now, there's a reason that they don't do that and why that set was considered generally a failure for mass markets as an official expansion release. But your cube, your rules. When it comes to your environment, you can have as much or a little gold as you want and do it whatever way. All the gold cards are dramatic and fun. Maybe all the gold cards are flexible, some combination thereof, whatever you want to do. So I like that this column kind of shows off some options, and the option that's important to call attention to is that you can have as much or as little gold as you want in your own environment. And lastly, and generally most importantly to playing games of Magic and building Magic decks, is the lands. There's just 3 full cycles. So you have Guild Gates, lands that enter tapped that add 1 or 2 colors and have the subtype Gate. There's a couple of cards that care about that in the environment, but not too much. Temples, which are lands similar to lands with tap. They don't have any special type. They add 1 of 2 colors and they scry 1 when they enter. And then lands that do the same, enter tapped, produce 1 of 2 colors, and gain 1 life when they enter. All of these lands enter tapped. That's going to make it so it's pretty difficult to play 3 or more colors. It'll be, I imagine, somewhat common that you play 3 colors, but you do have to start being mindful how many lands you can actually afford to have enter tapped. Maybe you start to lean heavier on stuff like Cultivator's Caravan, whatever. That's a good teaching moment if you want to talk about the cost of playing more colors. I do like that the lands after taps kind of pushes you in a direction where you want to play 2, 3-ish colors. Maybe you splash more than you play a fully 3 or more colored deck. So that kind of does teach good fundamentals, or just kind of shows off the game of Magic as it is most commonly played, which is definitely good for a starter environment. None of these cards are the strongest lands for doing the things that they do, but they are good enough to get you playing, and they're kind of lands that you would expect from this kind of thing. So they get the job done, and there is the right amount of them. 30 lands, and then plus 31 because you have the Evolving Wilds. That's the right volume of lands, in my experience, to really make these 180 card Twobert environments tick. So I like that aspect for sure, even if the land column is one of the first places I would be looking to make updates. And on that note, I know it's a fairly common thing for people in the Commander space to put out something where they start with a pre-constructed deck and then they offer their suggestions for how to improve it, maybe make it play a little bit better, some cards that can really synergize in the environment. And I explicitly don't want to do that in this cube. I want to put this out there, and I hopefully added some good context and food for thought in my discussion today. And I want you to explore this environment, decide what you like, and make the changes that speak to you. It doesn't make a ton of sense for me to say, all right, now here's how I would make this environment better, because better is just going to be speaking to my subjective tastes. And if you want to see the cubes that I prefer to play over this, I already have a ton of podcast articles you can check out my Cube Cobra page. I'm not going to be updating this cube. I'm just going to work on those cubes instead. They already do the things that I really want to do. And you can explore that for food for thought, but it's not going to be something about evolving this specific project. If you do pick this up, maybe you like it as is. Maybe you would enjoy continuing to play this for however long that you stick with Magic. Maybe you decide to make it your own, and that's really what I want to encourage as many people as possible to do. If I were to talk about one swap that I wanted to do, I will advocate for the 10 cards that I feel are really important, kind of fundamentally for every kind of Magic that I want to play, but even then they don't fit every cube. I would say that the mana system, that having good mana fixing lands, are kind of an essential aspect of what makes Magic great. I was talking about regarding Linden, how it is undesirable to be unable to cast your spells, but how there is still fun tension. An essential aspect of Magic is just the resource system, making one land drop a turn. That's a big thing that makes the game so replayable. You kind of have to start from scratch and figure out your mana in drafting when it comes to cube, and in every game that you play, starting from whether to keep or mulligan your opening hand. That adds a lot of inherent fun, tension, and drama to the game. And when all the lands enter tapped, it can kind of limit the amount of things you can do in a game, which is fine. It's not necessarily bad, it's just worth calling attention to. My preferred experience involves lands entering untapped, but it's also good to have a cost to those things. So the 10 cards that I would like to have to start off any collection is just shock lands. They're just lands with two types, so Steam Vents, for example. It's an island and a mountain, it counts as both. It enters tapped unless you pay 2 life. So you can play it just tap the same way you would play any other lands in this Twobert, or you can pay 2 life to get an untapped land and kind of fix your mana at that cost. I think that these are really fun game pieces, some of the best designs in all of Magic. At the same time, for this environment, I mean, immediately, if you, for example, cut the guild gates for them, then you also have to cut Archway Angel and Gateway Sneak, like the things that queue off of guild gates, which isn't the biggest cost, but, I'm already changing other things when you change that. It would be most natural to put them in over the gain 1 life lands. You do lose a little bit of synergy with the white gain life stuff, so it's not fully an upgrade. I generally find that they play better, or at least they lead to the kind of games and environments that I enjoy more. But even to that end, it's not like they're just better. And that's a big thing I want to reinforce today. There is no better or worse. There's for you, there's more for you, and there's less for you. We're talking about playing games for fun. And the most important thing is to curate the environment in the way that you enjoy it most, and the people that you want to play with will enjoy it most. So the starter collection very much was curated with love and care by the people who designed it to be a great new player experience, to show off a range of what's happening in Magic, and also to be a conversation starter in that way. This box is something that you can definitely play with for years. There's a lot of awesome cards, different ways to play it. If you pick it up, this Twobert is certainly not the only thing you can do with those cards. But then they introduce you to a lot of the history of a game that has a lot of history. They ask interesting questions, they feed your curiosity, they give you things to think about and things to explore. And so when I advocate for shocklands, I'm not saying that you or everyone should put shocklands in this or every cube. That's just something to think about, something to consider exploring. And one final time today, I will reiterate that cube is not a destination, it's a journey. So wherever you want to go with it, that's where you should go. You can't make a cube worse, you can only change it temporarily, and if you don't like it, you can change it back or change it in a completely different way. As long as you're doing it for you, as long as you are pursuing fun, as long as you are facilitating gameplay that you and the people you enjoy playing with enjoy playing, you're moving in the right direction, even if it's not a linear progression. Really nothing in this life is. So I do encourage you to explore the space if you want to pick up this cube and you want to make changes to it. Making changes makes sense. That's a big part of the fun of cube for me. But don't do it because me or anybody else encouraged you to play in a specific way. Once you build it, it's yours, and it's yours to do whatever you want to do with it. That's the beauty of Cube, and if you do put this one together, I hope you enjoy it, and more importantly, I hope you enjoy the journey to come. Thank you so much for listening today and for taking the effort to like, comment, share, subscribe, anything and everything you do to support me in this new creative endeavor of mine. As always, it is a pleasure to share my joy and my passion with y'all in this way. Thanks again for listening, and I'll be back next week talking more Cube. Later, gamers.